Gabrielle Washington stood frozen in the cockpit, watching the FAA inspector stride toward her aircraft with a face carved from stone. 30 minutes ago, she'd been a respected captain with 2 decades of flawless service. Now her 20-year career hung by a thread because of 5 words from her white co-pilot, "Are you sure you're qualified?" What happened next would expose a truth far more shocking than anyone could imagine, and change aviation forever. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their skin color, smash that like button right now. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this need to be heard. Trust me, you won't believe what happens when the truth finally comes out. Now, let's get into what really went down that July morning. The Texas sun blazed across the tarmac at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport as Captain Gabrielle Washington walked through the crew entrance at 5:30 in the morning. At 42 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned every stripe on her uniform. 20 years of flying. 12,300 hours logged. She was one of only a handful of black female captains at a major U.S. airline, and she'd fought through every barrier, every whispered doubt, every suspicious glance to get here. This morning felt like any other. She had no idea it would become the day that tested everything she'd built. Gabrielle stopped at the crew briefing room, scanning the weather reports on the monitor. Clear skies from Dallas to Atlanta. Light winds. Perfect flying conditions for the morning departure on Boeing 737. She'd flown this route hundreds of times, could practically navigate it in her sleep. She pulled up the passenger manifest, noting they'd have a full flight, 240 souls on board. The weight of that responsibility never got lighter, no matter how many years passed. Every single person trusted her to get them home safely. She took a slow breath, centering herself the way she always did before a flight. Professional. Focused. Ready. She grabbed her flight bag and headed toward the gate, her shoes clicking against the polished terminal floor. That's when she saw him. Trevor Mitchell stood near the gate desk, checking his watch with an impatient gesture. He was her first officer for today's flight, a man she'd never flown with before. 35 years old according to his file, with sandy brown hair and a kind of clean-cut appearance that screamed military background. Gabrielle extended her hand as she approached, smiling warmly. "Good morning, First Officer Mitchell. I'm Captain Washington. Looking forward to flying with you today." Trevor's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite name. Surprise, maybe. Or disbelief. He shook her hand limply, his grip barely there. "Wait, you're the captain." His voice carried a note of incredulity that made her spine stiffen. She'd heard that tone before, too many times to count. "That's right," Gabrielle replied, keeping her voice level and professional. "I'll be pilot in command for this flight. You'll be monitoring and assisting. Have you had a chance to review the flight plan?" Trevor stared at her for another beat too long, then seemed to catch himself. Yeah. Yeah, I looked it over." But his tone suggested he hadn't really absorbed what she'd said. He glanced around the gate area as if looking for someone else, someone who might tell him this was a mistake. Gabrielle felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach, the one that appeared whenever she had to prove herself all over again. She'd been the first black woman in her training class. The first black female captain at her airline's regional hub. She'd thought by now, in 2025, things would be different. But here it was again, that look of doubt. "Great," she continued, refusing to let his attitude derail her. "Let's head to the aircraft and start our pre-flight checks. We've got about 40 minutes before boarding begins." She turned and walked toward the jetway, hearing Trevor's footsteps behind her. Slow. Hesitant. When they entered the cockpit, Gabrielle immediately fell into her routine, checking circuit breakers, testing the flight controls, reviewing the fuel load. Trevor settled into the right seat but his movements were stiff, mechanical. Every few seconds, she felt his eyes on her, watching her like she might suddenly reveal she didn't know what she was doing. "You've been flying the 737 long?" he asked, and there was an edge to the question that made it sound less like friendly conversation and more like an interrogation. 15 years on this aircraft type, Gabrielle answered without looking up from her checklist. "Before that, I flew regional jets for 5 years. Started my career in the Air Force, actually. Flew transport missions overseas." She offered this information knowing it might help establish her credibility, hating that she felt the need to do so. Trevor made a noncommittal sound. "Ha. That's quite a background." But his tone suggested he didn't believe her, or didn't think it mattered. Gabrielle's jaw tightened. She continued her pre-flight routine, double-checking every system, every gauge, every control. The tension in the cockpit grew thicker with each passing minute. "Captain Washington." The voice came from behind them. Patricia Reynolds, the lead flight attendant, poked her head into the cockpit. Patricia was 50 years old, a black woman who'd been flying for nearly as long as Gabrielle. Her warm brown eyes took in the scene immediately, reading the stiffness in Gabrielle's shoulders, the cold distance in Trevor's posture. "Just wanted to let you know we're starting pre-boarding in about 10 minutes. Anything you need from us?" Gabrielle turned and smiled at her friend. "We're all set, Patricia. Thanks for checking." Patricia lingered for a moment, her gaze shifting to Trevor with a look of assessment. She'd seen this before too. "You let me know if you need anything at all," she said pointedly, and Gabrielle caught the deeper meaning. Patricia would be watching. She would have Gabrielle's back. As Patricia left, Trevor spoke up again. "So how long have you been captain?" Another question that shouldn't have felt loaded but somehow did. 8 years, Gabrielle replied. "I was promoted to captain in 2017 after serving as first officer for 12 years. She turned to face him directly now, meeting his gaze. "First Officer Mitchell, is there something specific you'd like to know about my qualifications? Because I'm happy to answer any professional questions you might have." Trevor's face flushed slightly. "No, I'm just making conversation. Getting to know my captain. That's all." But they both knew it wasn't all. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Gabrielle returned to her pre-flight duties, but her mind raced. She'd encountered bias before, subtle and overt, throughout her entire career. Passengers who'd asked to speak to the real pilot. Training instructors who'd graded her more harshly than her white male counterparts. Fellow pilots who'd questioned whether she'd earned her position or benefited from diversity initiatives. She'd developed thick skin over the years, had learned to let most of it roll off her shoulders. But something about Trevor's attitude felt different. More aggressive. More dangerous. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. He was staring at his phone now, jaw clenched, fingers tight around the device. Whatever he was thinking, it wasn't good. The gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now begin boarding flight 423 with service to Atlanta. We'd like to welcome our first-class passengers and those needing extra time." The sounds of the jetway door opening reached the cockpit. Passengers would be streaming on soon, trusting that the two people in these seats knew what they were doing, that they could work together professionally to ensure everyone's safety. Gabrielle took a deep breath and continued her checks, trying to push down the growing sense of unease. She'd flown with difficult first officers before. She could handle this. She had to handle this. But as Trevor shifted in his seat beside her, she couldn't shake the feeling that this flight was going to be different from any other she'd ever commanded. 15 minutes before their scheduled departure, with passengers still boarding and the cabin crew doing their safety demonstrations, Trevor Mitchell suddenly stopped what he was doing. His hands went still on the checklist he'd been reviewing. Gabrielle sensed the shift in energy immediately, felt his attention laser focus on her. When she glanced over, his expression had hardened into something cold and resolute. Captain Washington, he said, his voice carrying a formal stiffness that hadn't been there before, I need to see your license. The words hit Gabrielle like a physical blow. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard him. Excuse me. Trevor's blue eyes were ice cold now, all pretense of collegiality gone. Your pilot's license. I need to see it. Right now. Gabrielle's heart began to pound. In 20 years of flying, no first officer had ever made such a demand of her. It was unprecedented, a fundamental breach of cockpit protocol and respect. First Officer Mitchell, my credentials are on file with the company and the FAA. They've been verified through every channel. What exactly are you questioning? I have concerns about your qualifications, Trevor stated flatly, as if he were discussing a routine mechanical issue rather than making a devastating accusation about his captain's legitimacy. Gabrielle felt heat rising in her face, a combination of shock and fury. Concerns based on what, exactly? Her voice remained steady through sheer force of will. Trevor leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms. I've never flown with someone like you before. I need to verify that you're actually certified to command this aircraft. It's my responsibility as first officer to ensure the safety of this flight. Someone like you. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Gabrielle's hands clenched into fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palms. She knew exactly what he meant. She'd known from the moment she'd seen that look in his eyes at the gate. This wasn't about her credentials or her qualifications. This was about the color of her skin. This was about a white man who couldn't accept that a black woman sat in the captain's seat, who'd rather sabotage a flight than acknowledge her authority. First Officer Mitchell, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous quiet, what you're doing right now constitutes insubordination. My qualifications are not up for debate. I am the pilot in command of this aircraft, and I'm ordering you to complete your pre-flight duties. But Trevor didn't back down. If anything, his jaw set more firmly. Show me your credentials, or I'm filing a safety concern with the FAA. The threat was clear. Gabrielle's mind raced. If she refused, he'd escalate. If she complied, she'd be setting a precedent that any white first officer could demand proof of her legitimacy whenever they felt like it. Either way, she lost. Either way, her authority was being undermined in the most public, humiliating way possible. And they had a plane full of passengers waiting to depart. She reached for her flight bag with trembling fingers, pulling out her leather credential case. Inside was everything a pilot could need to prove their legitimacy: her airline transport pilot license, her first-class medical certificate valid through next March, her type rating for the Boeing 737, her company ID with her captain's designation clearly marked. She'd earned every single one of these documents through years of hard work, endless studying, rigorous testing, and flight after flight after flight. She laid them on the center console between them with more force than necessary. There, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. My credentials. All current. All valid. All earned through the same process every other pilot in this country goes through. Trevor picked up each document, examining them with exaggerated care. He held her license up to the light as if checking for forgeries. He studied her medical certificate, reading every line. Gabrielle watched him, her chest tight with humiliation and rage. Through the cockpit door, she could hear passengers settling into their seats, stowing their bags, completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the flight deck. Patricia's voice came over the intercom, warm and professional, welcoming everyone aboard. The normalcy of those sounds made this moment feel even more surreal. These look legitimate, Trevor finally said, but his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. But I'm still not comfortable. Gabrielle snatched her credentials back. What exactly would make you comfortable, First Officer Mitchell? What proof could I possibly provide that would satisfy whatever standard you've decided to hold me to? Her voice rose despite her efforts to control it. I've shown you everything required by federal aviation regulations. Everything. What more do you want? I want to know that you actually earned these, Trevor shot back, and there it was, out in the open now. The accusation that she was some kind of diversity hire, that she'd been given her position rather than earning it, that a black woman couldn't possibly be qualified to sit in the left seat. Gabrielle felt something break inside her chest. 20 years of professionalism, of taking the high road, of proving herself over and over again, and here she was, being questioned by someone with a fraction of her experience based solely on her race. I earned every single one of these credentials, she said, her voice shaking now. I earned them the same way you earned yours. Through training, testing, and demonstrating competency. And I don't owe you any further explanation. But even as she said it, she knew it wouldn't matter. Trevor had already made up his mind. Patricia appeared in the cockpit doorway, her face a mask of concern. She'd obviously heard the raised voices. Captain, is everything okay? The passengers are getting restless. We're supposed to close the door in 5 minutes. Trevor stood abruptly, pulling out his phone. I need to make a call, he announced. Gabrielle's stomach dropped. What kind of call? But she already knew. Trevor stepped past Patricia into the galley area, and Gabrielle heard him speaking in low, urgent tones. Yes, this is First Officer Trevor Mitchell. I need to report a safety concern regarding Flight 423 out of Dallas-Fort Worth. I'm not confident in the captain's qualifications to command this aircraft. I need an FAA inspector to verify credentials before we depart. Each word was like a knife in Gabrielle's back. Patricia moved quickly into the cockpit, closing the door behind her. Gabrielle, what is happening? Her voice was low and fierce. He's reporting you. On what grounds? Gabrielle couldn't speak for a moment. She just shook her head, feeling tears of fury and humiliation burning behind her eyes. When she finally found her voice, it came out as a whisper. He questioned my license, Patricia. He thinks I'm not qualified because I'm black. And now he's called the FAA on me. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. He can't do this. This is discrimination. This is illegal. But he's doing it, Gabrielle said, her voice hollow. She looked down at her hands, at the credentials still clutched in her fingers, at the uniform she'd worn with such pride that morning. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, was crumbling around her because of one racist first officer who couldn't see past her skin color. Trevor returned to the cockpit doorway, his expression grim but satisfied. The FAA is sending an inspector. We'll be delayed until they arrive and verify the situation. Gabrielle wanted to scream. She wanted to throw him off her aircraft. But she was trapped. If she lost her composure now, he'd use it as further evidence that she wasn't fit to command. So she did the only thing she could do. She picked up the intercom handset with a hand that shook only slightly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington from the flight deck. We're experiencing a brief administrative delay. We appreciate your patience and expect to be underway shortly. Her voice came out steady and professional, giving no hint of the nightmare unfolding around her. But inside, she was screaming. 20 agonizing minutes crawled by. Gabrielle sat in the captain's seat, staring at the instrument panel without really seeing it. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of confused passengers, the rustle of magazines, the beep of call buttons. Patricia had made several trips to the cockpit, each time bringing updates about the growing frustration in the cabin. People had connecting flights to catch. Business meetings to attend. Families waiting at the other end. And they were all being held hostage by one man's prejudice. Trevor stood at the back of the cockpit, arms crossed, saying nothing. Waiting. When Inspector Clayton Burke finally appeared in the cockpit doorway, Gabrielle's heart sank even further. He was a white man in his mid-50s, with steel gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He carried a tablet computer and wore the unmistakable expression of someone who dealt with too many pilot disputes and had run out of patience for all of them. Captain Washington. His voice was clipped, professional, entirely lacking in warmth. I'm Inspector Burke from the FAA. I understand there's been a concern raised about your credentials. Gabrielle stood, forcing herself to meet his eyes with all the dignity she could muster. Yes, sir. First Officer Mitchell has questioned my qualifications despite the fact that all my credentials are current and valid. She retrieved her documents once more, hating that she had to do this again, hating the way Trevor watched from the corner with that satisfied expression. Burke took the documents, settling into the observer's seat behind the center console. He pulled out reading glasses and began examining everything with methodical precision. The silence stretched out, broken only by the air conditioning system and the distant sounds of the terminal. Your ATP license was issued when? Burke asked, not looking up. 2005, Gabrielle answered, proud that her voice didn't waver. I've maintained continuous certification since then. Burke tapped something on his tablet. And your type rating for the 737? 2010. I've logged over 8,000 hours on this aircraft type. Burke continued his examination, asking question after question. What was her training history? Where had she attended flight school? What was her accident history? Gabrielle answered each query with precision, providing dates, details, documentation for everything. She'd been a model pilot her entire career. Not a single incident. Not a single violation. Her record was spotless. Through the cockpit door, she caught glimpses of passengers craning their necks, trying to see what was happening. She saw a businessman in first class pull out his phone, probably tweeting about the delay. Saw a mother with two small children looking stressed and exhausted. All of them waiting because Trevor Mitchell had decided a black woman didn't belong in the captain's seat. Burke finally looked up from his tablet. Captain Washington, everything here appears to be in order. Your credentials are valid and current. Relief flooded through Gabrielle for one brief, shining moment. But then Burke continued. However, given that an official safety complaint has been filed, I'm required to follow protocol. I need you to step off this aircraft while we complete a full investigation of the allegations. The words hit like a physical blow. Sir, you just confirmed my credentials are valid. What more is there to investigate? Gabrielle heard the desperation creeping into her voice and hated herself for it. Burke's expression remained unmoved. First Officer Mitchell has filed a formal complaint questioning your competency. Until that complaint is fully resolved through our administrative process, I cannot allow you to command this flight. It's procedure. Gabrielle's legs felt weak. This is racial discrimination. He's questioning my competency solely because of my race. You can't let him do this. Captain, I'm not making a judgment about the motivations behind the complaint, Burke said, standing. I'm following FAA protocol. You're being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Please gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. He gestured toward the cockpit door like she was some kind of criminal being escorted out. Patricia had returned to the doorway, and when she heard Burke's pronouncement, her eyes went wide with horror. You can't be serious. She's done nothing wrong. This is outrageous. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you, Burke said dismissively. But Patricia stepped fully into the cockpit, positioning herself protectively near Gabrielle. This concerns all of us. Captain Washington is one of the finest pilots at this airline. She's being persecuted because of her race, and you're enabling it. Burke's jaw tightened. Step back, please, or I'll have security remove you as well. The threat hung in the air. Gabrielle put a hand on Patricia's arm, squeezing gently. It's okay. I'll go. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. She couldn't look at Trevor, couldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She gathered her flight bag with hands that felt numb and disconnected from her body. The walk from the cockpit through first class toward the exit was the longest of Gabrielle's life. Every passenger turned to stare. She heard the whispers start immediately. Why is the captain leaving? Is something wrong with the plane? Who's going to fly us? A businessman in seat 3A called out, "Captain, what's going on? Are we safe?" Gabrielle couldn't answer. If she opened her mouth, she'd either start crying or start screaming, and she couldn't afford either. She kept her eyes forward, kept walking, kept breathing. In the galley, Patricia caught up to her. "Gabrielle, don't do this. Fight back." She pressed something into Gabrielle's hand. Her phone number, written on a napkin. "Call me the second you're done with them. We're going to fix this. I promise you, we're going to fix this." Gabrielle nodded mutely, not trusting her voice. She stepped into the jetway, and the door closed behind her with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like finality. Through the window, she could see passengers still staring, confused and alarmed. She'd spent 20 years building trust with the traveling public, demonstrating that she was competent and professional and safe. And in 30 minutes, one racist first officer had destroyed it all. Burke appeared beside her, along with another FAA official, a woman Gabrielle hadn't seen before. "Captain Washington, please follow us to the airport office. We need to conduct a formal interview." As they walked through the terminal, Gabrielle felt the stares of airport employees and travelers. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked curious. A few looked suspicious, like maybe there really was something wrong with her, some reason she'd been pulled from a flight. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands and saw text messages flooding in. Her airline's crew scheduling had already been notified. She was being removed from all her scheduled flights pending investigation. 20 years of perfect service, and she was being grounded like some rookie who'd shown up drunk. The injustice of it threatened to choke her. They led her into a small office near the operations center. Industrial carpet, harsh fluorescent lights, a conference table with chairs that had seen better days. Burke gestured for her to sit. The other official, who still hadn't introduced herself, pulled out a recording device. "This interview is being recorded for official FAA records," Burke stated formally. "Please state your full name and captain's license number." Gabrielle complied, her voice mechanical. And then they began. The same questions Burke had already asked in the cockpit. The same answers she'd already provided. Over and over, circling the same territory, looking for some crack in her story, some hint that Trevor's concerns might be legitimate. "Captain Washington, have you ever failed a check ride?" "No, sir. I passed every evaluation on the first attempt." "Have you ever had any disciplinary actions?" "No, sir. My record is completely clean." "Have you ever been involved in any accidents or incidents?" "No, sir. Not a single one in 20 years and 12,000 hours. The questions went on. And on. And on. While she sat in this windowless office being interrogated, her flight was being reassigned to another captain. Trevor Mitchell was probably sitting in that cockpit right now, satisfied that he'd put an uppity black woman in her place. The thought made Gabrielle's blood boil. Finally, Burke sat back. "Captain, I want to be clear that at this point, we've found no evidence of any deficiency in your credentials or qualifications." Gabrielle wanted to scream at him. "Then why am I here? Why did you pull me off that flight? Why are you letting him do this?" But she kept her face neutral, waiting. However, Burke continued, "The complaint has been filed. It will take time to fully investigate and resolve. Until then, you remain on administrative leave." Time. How much time? Days? Weeks? Months? How long would her career be in limbo because of one man's racism? The other official finally spoke. She was Asian American, younger than Burke, with sharp, intelligent eyes. Captain Washington, I'm Inspector Linda Chen. I've been reviewing your file while Inspector Burke conducted the interview. She paused, and something in her expression gave Gabrielle a tiny spark of hope. I have some questions about First Officer Mitchell's complaint. Specifically, I'd like to understand exactly what prompted him to raise these concerns. Can you walk me through the interaction from the beginning? So Gabrielle did. She recounted every detail, from Trevor's initial surprise at seeing her as captain, to his increasingly hostile questions, to his final demand to see her license and his call to the FAA. As she spoke, she saw Linda taking notes, her expression growing more troubled. When Gabrielle finished, Linda looked at Burke. This sounds less like a legitimate safety concern and more like discrimination. Burke shifted uncomfortably. That's a serious allegation. It's a serious situation, Linda shot back. She turned to Gabrielle. Captain, have you had any other instances of discrimination during your career? And suddenly, Gabrielle realized something. Linda Chen believed her. This woman, this inspector, was actually listening. Actually seeing what was happening. For the first time since this nightmare began, Gabrielle felt like maybe, just maybe, someone was on her side. Linda Chen leaned forward across the conference table, her dark eyes fixed intently on Gabrielle. Captain Washington, I want you to know that I take discrimination allegations very seriously. What happened to you today should never happen to any pilot, regardless of their race or gender. The words were like water in a desert. Gabrielle felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not here. Thank you, Inspector Chen. I've faced bias before in my career, but nothing like this. Nothing so public and so devastating. Linda nodded, her fingers moving swiftly across her tablet screen. I'm pulling up First Officer Mitchell's complete file right now. Burke, have you reviewed his history? Burke shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I glanced at it. He's been flying for about 3 years. No major incidents on record. But Linda's expression had changed as she scrolled through the information. Her eyebrows drew together, her lips pressing into a thin line. No major incidents, but there are some flags here that concern me. She turned the tablet so both Gabrielle and Burke could see the screen. 2 incident reports filed against Mitchell in the past 18 months. Gabrielle leaned forward, her heart beginning to pound for a different reason now. On the screen was a complaint filed by Captain Rosa Mendez, a Latina woman who'd flown with Trevor 6 months ago. The report detailed how Trevor had repeatedly questioned her decisions, undermined her authority in front of the crew, and made comments suggesting she'd been promoted due to the airline's diversity initiatives rather than merit. The complaint had been filed but apparently never seriously investigated. Marked as, counseling provided, and closed. Linda scrolled down to the second report. This one came from a flight attendant named Jennifer Park, who described Trevor making inappropriate comments about female pilots and crew members. She'd reported feeling uncomfortable and disrespected. Again, the complaint had been minimally addressed. Now here's a question for all of you watching. If you think these complaints should have been taken more seriously, comment number 1 right now. If you believe airlines need better systems for addressing discrimination, hit that like button. And subscribe because this story is about to take a turn nobody saw coming. The truth about Trevor Mitchell goes deeper than anyone imagined. But first, I need to know, have you ever witnessed discrimination in your workplace? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's talk about why this pattern keeps repeating. What do you think should happen next? Stay with me because the investigation is about to uncover something that changes everything. Linda looked up from the tablet, her expression grim. Captain Washington, you're the 3rd woman of color to file a complaint about First Officer Mitchell. This is a pattern, not an isolated incident. Burke's face had gone pale. He clearly hadn't done his homework. Linda wasn't finished. I'm going to recommend a full investigation into Mitchell's conduct. But more than that, I want to dig deeper into his credentials. Something doesn't add up. Gabrielle felt her pulse quicken. What do you mean? Linda's fingers flew across her tablet. His training records. He got his ATP certificate through a program that has had some questions raised about it. Let me make a call. She pulled out her phone and stepped into the hallway, leaving Gabrielle alone with Burke. The older inspector looked distinctly uncomfortable now. Captain, I want to apologize. I should have looked into Mitchell's history more thoroughly before pulling you from that flight. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But Gabrielle nodded stiffly, accepting the inadequate apology because what else could she do? Linda returned 15 minutes later, and her expression was thunderous. We have a serious problem. I just spoke with the training center where Mitchell obtained his ATP certification. There are irregularities in his records. One of the examiners who signed off on his check rides was fired last year for accepting bribes to pass unqualified pilots. The room went silent. Gabrielle's mind raced. Are you saying Mitchell might not be legitimately certified? Linda held up a hand. I'm saying we need to investigate immediately. Burke, I want Mitchell's medical certificate verified, his training records audited, and his flight history reviewed. If there's any indication he obtained his credentials fraudulently, he needs to be grounded right now. Burke pulled out his phone, already dialing. Gabrielle watched this unfold with a mixture of vindication and horror. Trevor had questioned her qualifications, had humiliated her in front of passengers and crew, had potentially derailed her career. And all along, he might have been the one who wasn't qualified. Linda turned to Gabrielle. Captain, I need you to wait here while we verify some information. This may take a little while. She paused, then added, I want you to know that regardless of what we find with Mitchell, you've been treated unjustly today. I'll be including that in my report. Gabrielle nodded, not trusting her voice. Linda and Burke left the office, their voices fading down the hallway as they made urgent phone calls. Gabrielle sat alone in the harsh fluorescent light, her mind spinning. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Flight finally departed with different crew. 2-hour delay. Everyone asking about you. Thinking of you. Stay strong. Another text came through, this one from her union representative. Heard what happened. This is unacceptable. We're filing a grievance and will support you fully. Call me when you can. Then her phone started ringing. News outlets. Somehow the story had already leaked. Captain Washington, this is Sarah Chen from Dallas Morning News. We've heard reports of a black female pilot being removed from a flight after racial discrimination. Can you comment? Gabrielle declined the call, then another, then another. The media frenzy was beginning. She thought about her parents, both in their 70s, who would see this news and worry. About her nieces and nephews who looked up to her as proof that they could achieve anything. What would they think when they saw their aunt being dragged through this? 45 minutes later, Linda returned. Her face was set in hard lines. Captain Washington, we've verified your credentials through every possible channel. Everything checks out perfectly, as we knew it would. But First Officer Mitchell's situation is more complex. His medical certificate expired 2 weeks ago. He's been flying illegally. Gabrielle's jaw dropped. What? Linda sat down heavily. He failed his last medical exam due to some psychological evaluation concerns related to anger management and authority issues. He was supposed to be grounded until he completed counseling and passed a re-evaluation. Instead, he apparently falsified the date on his medical certificate and continued flying. Oh my God, Gabrielle whispered. This man had questioned her credentials while flying with fraudulent documents. There's more, Linda continued. We've contacted the training facility. The examiner who signed off on Mitchell's initial ATP check ride is currently under investigation by the FAA's Fraud Division. We're reviewing every pilot he certified. Mitchell may have paid for his passing grade. Burke entered behind Linda, looking shaken. I've issued an emergency order. Mitchell is being removed from his current flight immediately and his license is suspended pending full investigation. Airport security is bringing him to us now. Gabrielle sat back in her chair, stunned. The man who tried to destroy her career was about to have his own career implode. But there was no satisfaction in it, only a deep, weary anger at a system that had allowed this to happen. That had taken his word over hers. That had grounded her while he continued flying with fake credentials. Linda reached across the table and put her hand over Gabrielle's. I'm so sorry this happened to you. We failed you today. The system failed you. But I promise you, we're going to make this right. The door burst open with enough force to make all three of them jump. Trevor Mitchell stood in the doorway, flanked by two airport security officers. His face was flushed red, his eyes wild with panic and rage. Gone was the smug confidence he'd displayed in the cockpit. Now he looked like a cornered animal. What the hell is going on? He demanded, his voice cracking. They pulled me off my flight. They're saying my medical certificate is invalid. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. Inspector Burke stood, his posture rigid and official. First Officer Mitchell, your medical certification expired on October 18th. You've been flying for 2 weeks with invalid credentials. That's a federal violation. Trevor's face went from red to white. No. No, that can't be right. I have my medical. He fumbled for his wallet, pulling out a laminated card with shaking hands. Linda took it from him, examined it closely, then held it up to the light. This document has been altered. The expiration date has been changed. She pointed to slight discoloration in the numbers. This is forgery, First Officer Mitchell. And forgery of federal aviation documents is a crime. Trevor's eyes darted around the room wildly, finally landing on Gabrielle. For a moment, something like recognition flickered across his face. Then his expression twisted into fury. This is her fault, he spat, pointing at Gabrielle with a trembling finger. She's doing this because I questioned her. This is retaliation. She's making up lies about me. Gabrielle rose slowly from her chair, drawing herself up to her full height. She looked Trevor Mitchell directly in the eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was cold as winter steel. I didn't need to make up anything about you. Your own actions exposed exactly who you are. You're a fraud, Trevor shouted, taking a step toward her before the security officers grabbed his arms. You got your position because of affirmative action. You're not qualified. You'll never be qualified no matter how many fake certificates you have. The irony of his words, given what had just been discovered about his own credentials, would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. Linda stepped between them. That's enough. First Officer Mitchell, your credentials are under formal investigation by the FAA. We have evidence suggesting your ATP certification was obtained through fraudulent means, specifically through an examiner who's currently under investigation for accepting bribes. The color drained from Trevor's face completely now. His mouth opened and closed but no sound came out. Inspector Burke pulled out his phone, reading from the screen. We've just received confirmation from the training center. You failed your initial ATP check ride twice. Then suddenly, on your third attempt with examiner Richard Morrison, you passed with flying colors. Morrison is the same examiner who's been charged with accepting payments to falsify test results. Care to explain that? I don't have to explain anything to you, Trevor finally managed, but his voice had lost all its power. He sounded defeated, desperate. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer. Burke nodded to the security officers. Take him to the airport police office. Federal charges will be filed. As they led Trevor toward the door, he twisted around one last time to glare at Gabrielle. You think you've won? You think this changes anything? People like you will never belong in that cockpit. No matter how many of us you destroy. People like me, Gabrielle repeated, her voice shaking now but not with fear. With rage. With 20 years of accumulated frustration and pain. You mean people who actually earned their credentials? Who didn't cheat or lie or forge documents? Who didn't put passengers' lives at risk by flying with fake medical certificates? She took a step toward him, and the security officers tightened their grip on his arms. You question my qualifications when I have a spotless 20-year record. You humiliated me in front of passengers and crew. You tried to destroy my career because you couldn't handle the fact that a black woman was your captain. Gabrielle was fully standing now, her voice rising. But here's what you didn't count on. The truth. The truth that you're the fraud. You're the one who didn't belong in that cockpit. You're the one who endangered lives. And now everyone is going to know it. Trevor's face crumpled. For just a second, Gabrielle saw something that might have been shame flicker across his features. Then it was gone, replaced by sullen anger. The security officers pulled him out into the hallway. His voice echoed back. This isn't over. You'll see. This isn't over. But it was over. At least for him. Linda turned to Gabrielle, and there were tears in the inspector's eyes. Captain Washington, on behalf of the FAA, I apologize. What happened to you today was inexcusable. You were treated as guilty until proven innocent, while he was given every benefit of the doubt despite multiple complaints against him. That's wrong. That's systematic bias, and we have to do better. Burke stepped forward, looking older and more tired than he had an hour ago. Captain, I owe you a personal apology as well. I should have investigated more thoroughly before removing you from that flight. I made assumptions, and those assumptions were influenced by biases I didn't even realize I had. Gabrielle wanted to be gracious. Wanted to accept their apologies and move forward. But the wound was too fresh, too deep. Do you know what this feels like? Her voice cracked. I've been flying for 20 years. I've logged 12,000 hours. I've never had an accident, never had an incident, never had a single violation. My record is perfect. And still, a white man with 3 years of experience and fraudulent credentials was believed over me. I was pulled off a flight in front of 200 passengers. My reputation was damaged. My career was put in jeopardy. All because of the color of my skin. The room was silent except for the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Finally, Linda spoke. You're right. And I wish I could tell you this won't happen again. But we both know it probably will, to you or someone else who looks like you, unless we make fundamental changes to how these situations are handled. She pulled out her tablet. I'm going to recommend several things in my official report. First, immediate investigation of anyone who files a discrimination complaint, not just the person being accused. Second, mandatory bias training for all FAA inspectors. Third, a review of how we handle allegations of pilot incompetence to ensure they're based on actual evidence, not prejudice. Fourth, Burke added, and he looked directly at Gabrielle, a formal apology to you, in writing, that goes in your permanent file. And fifth, I'm going to recommend that the airline provide you with whatever support you need, including counseling if you want it, and compensation for what you've been through today. Gabrielle nodded slowly. It was something. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Her phone buzzed again. More media requests. Her union rep, her chief pilot. The story was spreading, going viral on social media. By tomorrow, everyone in aviation would know what happened. Some would support her. Others would claim she was overreacting, playing the race card, making something out of nothing. She'd heard it all before. What happens now? Gabrielle asked quietly. Linda consulted her tablet. First Officer Mitchell will be charged with several federal offenses. Falsifying federal documents, flying with an invalid medical certificate, potentially bribery if we can prove he paid Morrison. He's looking at significant jail time. His pilot's license will be permanently revoked. He'll never fly commercially again. There was a grim satisfaction in hearing that, but it didn't erase what Gabrielle had been through. And me? She asked. What happens to my career? You're reinstated immediately, Burke said firmly. All administrative holds are lifted. You're cleared to return to flight status as soon as you feel ready. The airline has been notified that you were wrongfully removed from your flight and that no disciplinary action of any kind is warranted. Linda added, I'll also be calling the airline's CEO personally to brief him on what happened and to make sure they understand the severity of how you were treated. You shouldn't face any retaliation or stigma from this. Gabrielle almost laughed at that. Shouldn't. But would she? How many of her fellow pilots would hear this story and assume there must have been something to Trevor's complaints, some grain of truth that justified the investigation? How many passengers would remember seeing her pulled from the cockpit and wonder if she was really safe to fly with? The damage was done. Even with Trevor exposed as a fraud, even with full vindication, the stain remained. That's how racism worked. It didn't need proof or evidence. It just needed suspicion, innuendo, doubt. And once planted, those seeds were nearly impossible to uproot completely. By the time Gabrielle left the airport office 3 hours later, her phone had exploded with notifications. Hundreds of texts. Missed calls. Social media mentions. The story had gone national. As she walked through the terminal toward the parking garage, she saw people staring, recognizing her from the news alerts that were already circulating. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked curious. A few looked skeptical. She kept her head high and kept walking, even though every step felt like she was wading through water. Her car sat in the crew parking lot where she'd left it that morning, a lifetime ago. The July sun beat down mercilessly, turning the interior into an oven. Gabrielle sat in the driver's seat with the engine running and the AC blasting, but she couldn't bring herself to put the car in reverse. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, and suddenly everything hit her at once. The humiliation. The anger. The fear. The overwhelming exhaustion. She put her head down on the steering wheel and let herself cry for the first time all day, great racking sobs that tore through her chest. Her phone rang. She almost didn't answer, but then she saw it was Patricia. Hello. Her voice came out rough and broken. Gabrielle, honey, I just saw the news. CNN is running the story. They're calling it racial discrimination, and they're identifying Trevor Mitchell by name. Are you okay? Where are you? Gabrielle wiped her eyes. I'm in my car. In the parking lot. I just can't make myself drive yet. There was a pause, then Patricia's firm voice. Stay there. I'm coming to you. Don't move. 20 minutes later, Patricia's car pulled up beside Gabrielle's. She got out and came over, opening the passenger door and sliding in beside her friend. Without a word, she pulled Gabrielle into a tight hug. They sat like that for a long time, neither speaking, just holding on. Finally, Patricia pulled back. Tell me everything. So Gabrielle did. She recounted the entire ordeal, from Trevor's initial questions to the moment he was led away by security. Patricia listened, her face moving through a range of emotions, anger, disbelief, satisfaction, sorrow. That man, Patricia said when Gabrielle finished, that man tried to destroy you because he couldn't handle your success. And he almost got away with it. She shook her head. But Gabrielle, you need to understand something. This isn't just your story anymore. This is every black pilot's story. Every woman pilot's story. Every person who's ever been questioned and doubted and dismissed because they didn't fit someone's narrow idea of what a captain should look like. You're going to become the face of this fight whether you want to or not. Gabrielle's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it. The NAACP wanted to issue a statement. The Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals wanted her to speak at their next conference. 3 different law firms wanted to discuss potential civil rights lawsuits. A literary agent wanted to talk about a book deal. I just wanted to fly planes, Gabrielle whispered. That's all I ever wanted. To fly. Patricia squeezed her hand. I know. But sometimes we're called to do more than what we wanted. Sometimes we're called to be the ones who change things for everyone who comes after us. Over the next 48 hours, the story exploded across every major news outlet. Cable news ran segments with titles like "Racism at 30,000 Feet" and "The Captain Who Was Grounded by Prejudice." Social media erupted. The hashtag Justice for Captain Washington trended nationwide. Video footage from passengers on the delayed flight started appearing online, showing Gabrielle being escorted off the aircraft, her face a mask of professional composure even as her career hung in the balance. The videos went viral, shared millions of times, each share accompanied by outrage and support. The airline issued a statement calling the incident deeply troubling and promising a full review of their procedures. The FAA issued their own statement, acknowledging that Captain Washington had been subjected to discriminatory treatment and announcing new protocols for handling pilot disputes. Trevor Mitchell's mugshot appeared on every news site, his face twisted in anger, a stark contrast to Gabrielle's dignified press photos. The stories about him grew darker. Reporters dug into his background and found a trail of racist social media posts he deleted but that had been archived. They found former classmates from his training program who described him as openly hostile to women and minorities in aviation. They found that this wasn't his first allegation of discrimination. He'd washed out of 2 other airline training programs before landing at his current employer, and both times he'd blamed his failures on what he called politically correct diversity initiatives, rather than his own inadequacies. The picture that emerged was of a deeply prejudiced man who'd felt entitled to a career in aviation despite lacking the qualifications or the character. And when confronted with a black woman captain who had everything he lacked, he tried to tear her down rather than face his own failures. But the media coverage wasn't uniformly supportive. Conservative commentators questioned whether Gabrielle was overreacting. Maybe he just had legitimate safety concerns, one Fox News personality suggested. Why does everything have to be about race? Online trolls flooded Gabrielle's social media with hateful messages. Some claimed she was lying about the whole incident. Others suggested she'd seduced Trevor to get back at him. Still others posted her home address and phone number online, leading to threatening calls and messages. Gabrielle hired security. She stayed with Patricia for a few days because she didn't feel safe in her own home. She gave one carefully prepared statement to the press through her union representative, declining interview requests because she couldn't trust her emotions not to overwhelm her on camera. But the Organization of Black Aerospace Professionals organized a press conference, and they asked Gabrielle to attend. She stood on a podium in Dallas, flanked by other black pilots, and faced a room full of cameras and reporters. "My name is Captain Gabrielle Washington," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "And I want to tell you what it's like to be a black woman pilot in America." She spoke for 15 minutes, describing not just what had happened with Trevor but the 1,000 small cuts that had come before. The passengers who'd asked to speak to the real pilot. The gate agents who'd assumed she was a flight attendant, not a captain. The mechanics who'd questioned her technical knowledge. The other pilots who'd suggested she'd been promoted to fill a quota. The constant, exhausting need to prove herself, to be twice as good, to never make a mistake because mistakes from white male pilots were individual failings but mistakes from her would be proof that diversity initiatives were a mistake. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The president of OBAP, Captain Roland Hayes, stepped forward. What happened to Captain Washington is not an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a disease that has infected aviation since its inception. We have fought for every inch of progress, and we're still fighting. Still proving. Still justifying our existence in spaces that were deliberately designed to exclude us. He turned to face Gabrielle. But we're not going anywhere. And we're not going to be silent anymore. The press conference went viral. Gabrielle's words were quoted in newspapers and magazines around the world. She received messages from pilots in South Africa, in Europe, in Asia, all sharing their own stories of discrimination and bias. Women pilots. Gay pilots. Latino pilots. Asian pilots. Indigenous pilots. Every marginalized group in aviation had their own stories of being questioned, doubted, dismissed. Gabrielle had opened a floodgate, and decades of suppressed experiences came pouring out. The airline industry was forced to respond. Multiple airlines announced new diversity and inclusion initiatives. The FAA formed a task force to study bias in aviation and recommend policy changes. Flight schools reported a surge in applications from young black students who'd seen Gabrielle's story and felt inspired. But there was also backlash. Some pilots' unions pushed back against what they called politically motivated witch hunts. Some white male pilots complained they were being unfairly targeted. The debate raged on every aviation forum, in every crew room, at every airline. Gabrielle watched it all from her living room, feeling simultaneously empowered and exhausted. She'd wanted justice for herself. What she'd gotten was a national reckoning with racism in aviation. And she wasn't sure she had the strength to be at the center of it. Patricia visited daily, bringing food and moral support. "You're changing the world," she told Gabrielle. "I know it doesn't feel like it right now. I know it feels like you're being torn apart. But trust me, 50 years from now, young pilots will learn your name in history classes. They'll know what you did." 3 weeks after the incident, Gabrielle received a call from Jennifer Martinez, the FAA administrator. "Captain Washington, I'd like you to come to Washington, D.C. There are some people who need to hear your story directly." 2 days later, Gabrielle found herself in a conference room in the Department of Transportation building, facing congressional staffers and FAA officials. Jennifer Martinez sat at the head of the table, a Latina woman in her 50s who'd risen through the ranks despite facing her own share of discrimination. "Captain Washington, thank you for coming," Jennifer began. "We've asked you here because we need to understand, from someone who's lived it, what changes need to happen in aviation to prevent incidents like yours from occurring again." Gabrielle looked around the table at the expectant faces. Some were genuinely interested. Others looked skeptical. She took a deep breath and began. She talked about the need for mandatory bias training, not just the one-time checkbox kind but ongoing, meaningful education about how prejudice affects decision-making. She talked about the need for better complaint investigation procedures that didn't automatically favor the person making the accusation. She talked about the lack of diversity in aviation leadership and how that perpetuated a culture where discrimination was overlooked or minimized. She talked about the statistics, how less than 3% of airline pilots were black, how less than 6% were women, how intersectional minorities like black women made up a fraction of a percent. She talked about the barriers that kept those numbers low, from the prohibitive cost of flight training to the old boys network that still dominated hiring and promotion. And she talked about solutions. Scholarship programs for underrepresented minorities. Mentorship initiatives. Transparent hiring practices. Consequences for discrimination that actually meant something. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Jennifer spoke. "Everything you've described requires systemic change. That takes time, resources, political will. But I want you to know, we're committed to making it happen." She pulled out a document. "I'm announcing today a comprehensive review of FAA discrimination complaint procedures. We're also mandating annual bias training for all FAA inspectors, with a particular focus on how unconscious bias affects safety determinations. And we're partnering with airlines to develop better reporting systems for discrimination. It was a start. Just a start, but more than Gabrielle had dared hope for. As the meeting concluded, several people approached her. A young black congressional staffer shook her hand, tears in her eyes. "My daughter wants to be a pilot. Thank you for fighting so she won't have to face what you did." An older white FAA official pulled her aside. "I'm ashamed to say I probably would have done what Burke did," believed Mitchell without question. "Your story opened my eyes. I'm sorry it took your pain to do it." Gabrielle flew back to Dallas that evening, emotionally drained but feeling something she hadn't felt since that terrible July morning. Hope. Real, tangible hope that change might actually be possible. She met with her chief pilot the next day. He was a white man in his 60s named Harrison Clark, and he'd been captain for 30 years. "Gabrielle," he said, using her first name for the first time in their professional relationship, "I owe you an apology. I knew Trevor Mitchell had complaints against him. I'd heard whispers. But I didn't take them seriously enough. I dismissed them as personality conflicts. I'm sorry." "Why?" Gabrielle asked bluntly. "Why didn't you take them seriously?" Harrison shifted uncomfortably. "Honestly? Because it was easier not to. Because investigating would have been messy and complicated. Because I didn't want to believe one of our pilots was capable of that kind of behavior." He met her eyes. "Those aren't good reasons. They're not excuses. They're explanations for how I failed in my responsibilities as chief pilot. It won't happen again." Gabrielle nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty." Harrison pulled out a file. "The airline wants to know when you're ready to return to flying. Whenever that is, you'll have full support. And if you're interested, we'd like to offer you a position helping to develop our new diversity and inclusion training programs. You'd still fly, but you'd also work with HR to make sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else." It was tempting. But Gabrielle had another idea forming. "I appreciate that offer. But I think I need to do something more. Something bigger." Over the next few weeks, she reached out to other black pilots, to women pilots, to every marginalized group in aviation she could find. She proposed creating a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting and promoting diversity in aviation. They would provide scholarships for flight training. They would offer mentorship programs connecting experienced pilots of color with students. They would advocate for policy changes. They would create a support network for pilots facing discrimination. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of pilots volunteered to help. Several airlines offered financial support. Philanthropic foundations expressed interest in funding. Within 2 months, Wings of Equality was officially incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit. Gabrielle became its executive director, though she insisted on maintaining her status as an active line pilot. "I'm not giving up flying," she told the board. "That's who I am. But I can do both." The organization's first initiative was a scholarship fund. They raised $500,000 in the first month and awarded 10 full-flight training scholarships to young black students who'd shown interest in aviation but couldn't afford the training. Gabrielle personally mentored 2 of them, spending her days off visiting flight schools, answering questions, sharing her experience. She spoke at high schools and community colleges, telling young people that the sky belonged to them too, regardless of what anyone else said. Meanwhile, Trevor Mitchell's legal case proceeded. He was indicted on 4 federal charges: falsifying federal documents, making false statements to federal officials, flying without proper medical certification, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His trial was scheduled for 6 months later, and prosecutors indicated they had overwhelming evidence. The bribery case against Richard Morrison, the crooked examiner, also moved forward, with testimony from dozens of pilots who'd paid him to pass their check rides. The scandal exposed a network of corruption that had compromised aviation safety for years. Gabrielle was asked to testify at Trevor's trial. She agreed, knowing it would mean reliving the trauma but feeling it was necessary for justice. 6 months after that terrible day, she walked into a federal courthouse and took the witness stand. Trevor sat at the defense table, looking diminished and defeated. His lawyer tried to paint him as the victim, claiming he'd been targeted because he tried to maintain safety standards. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged medical certificate. The payments to Morrison. The pattern of discrimination complaints. The racist social media posts. When it was Gabrielle's turn to testify, she spoke calmly and clearly, describing exactly what had happened. Trevor's lawyer tried to rattle her during cross-examination. Isn't it true, Captain Washington, that you've benefited from affirmative action throughout your career? Gabrielle looked the lawyer dead in the eye. No, sir. I've benefited from hard work, excellent training, and natural ability. Just like every other qualified pilot. What I haven't benefited from is the assumption of competence that white male pilots receive automatically. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Trevor Mitchell was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, and permanent revocation of his pilot's license. As the sentence was read, he turned to look at Gabrielle one last time. She stared back, unflinching. She'd won. But the victory felt hollow. Prison time for Trevor didn't undo what she'd been through. It didn't erase the humiliation or the damage to her reputation. It didn't give her back the sense of security she'd lost, the naive belief that if she just worked hard enough and was good enough, she'd be treated fairly. After the sentencing, Gabrielle gave a brief statement to the press gathered outside the courthouse. Today justice was served for one incident of discrimination. But Trevor Mitchell is not an isolated case. He's a symptom of a much larger problem. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep pushing for change. Not just for me, but for every pilot who comes after me. Every young person who dreams of flying but wonders if people who look like them are welcome in the sky. That evening, Gabrielle attended a Wings of Equality scholarship ceremony. They were awarding 20 scholarships this time, double the number from their first round. 20 young people, most of them from low-income backgrounds, most of them people of color, receiving $50,000 each for flight training. Gabrielle watched them accept their awards with tears streaming down their faces, watched their families cheer and celebrate, and she felt something shift inside her chest. This was why she'd survived Trevor's attack. This was the purpose her pain could serve. 6 months after the incident, Gabrielle finally felt ready to return to full-time flying. She'd kept her certifications current with simulator sessions and occasional flights, but she hadn't commanded a commercial flight since that July day. The airline had been patient, supportive, giving her all the time she needed. But she missed it. Missed the weight of responsibility, the satisfaction of a smooth landing, the view from 35,000 feet. She missed being Captain Washington, not just the woman who'd been discriminated against. Her first flight back was deliberately chosen, Dallas to Atlanta, the exact route she'd been scheduled to fly when Trevor had derailed everything. The airline offered to change it if she wanted, but Gabrielle insisted. She needed to reclaim that space, that route, that moment. She needed to prove to herself that she could do it. The night before the flight, she barely slept. Every scenario ran through her mind. What if the first officer questioned her again? What if passengers recognized her and reacted negatively? What if she'd lost her edge, her confidence? But when she arrived at the airport that morning, something felt different. As she walked through the terminal in her captain's uniform, people noticed her. Some smiled. A few gave her a thumbs up. One older black woman stopped her, touching her arm. "You're Captain Washington, aren't you? My granddaughter wants to be a pilot because of you. Thank you for being so brave." The woman's eyes were wet with tears. Gabrielle felt her own eyes stinging. Tell your granddaughter the sky is waiting for her. At the gate, she met her first officer. LaToya Johnson was a 32-year-old black woman with natural hair pulled back in a professional bun and bright, intelligent eyes. Captain Washington, it's an honor to fly with you, LaToya said, shaking Gabrielle's hand firmly. You're the reason I applied for my ATP. I saw what you went through, and I decided I couldn't let fear keep me out of the cockpit anymore. Gabrielle pulled the younger woman into a hug. The honor is mine. And please, call me Gabrielle when we're not in front of passengers. They conducted their pre-flight checks together, falling into an easy rhythm. LaToya was sharp, knowledgeable, asking intelligent questions and offering thoughtful input. This was what a professional cockpit was supposed to feel like. Collaboration. Mutual respect. Trust. Patricia appeared in the cockpit doorway, and when she saw Gabrielle in the captain's seat, her face broke into a radiant smile. Welcome home, Captain. The three women stood there for a moment, connected by something deeper than just their shared profession. They were warriors. Survivors. Champions. Boarding began. As passengers filed past the open cockpit door, many did a double take, recognizing Gabrielle from the news coverage. Most smiled or gave encouraging words. Glad to have you flying us, Captain. We're safe with you. One white businessman looked in, saw Gabrielle and LaToya, and muttered to his companion, "Great, diversity hires," but he said it loud enough for them to hear. Gabrielle felt LaToya tense beside her. She put a hand on the younger pilot's shoulder. Ignore it. We know who we are. His opinion doesn't matter. But it did matter, Gabrielle thought. It mattered that in 2025, after everything that had happened, there were still people who couldn't see a black woman pilot without assuming she was unqualified. It mattered that LaToya would face the same discrimination Gabrielle had, that every black pilot would, until the culture fundamentally changed. But right now, in this moment, they were going to fly this plane. They were going to do it perfectly. And they were going to prove, once again, that they belonged here. A little girl appeared in the cockpit doorway. She was maybe 10 years old, black, with her hair in neat braids and wearing a t-shirt that said, "Future Pilot." Her mother stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder. "Captain," the mother said softly, "my daughter's name is Zoe. She's been talking about becoming a pilot ever since she saw your story on the news. Would you mind if she asked you a question?" Gabrielle unbuckled her seatbelt and crouched down to Zoe's eye level. "Hi Zoe. I'd love to answer your question." The little girl's eyes were wide with wonder. "Captain Washington, did you always know you wanted to be a pilot?" Gabrielle smiled, thinking back to her own childhood, to the first time she'd seen a plane take off and felt that magnetic pull toward the sky. "You know what? Yes, I did. From the time I was about your age. And people told me I couldn't do it. They said girls didn't fly planes, especially black girls. But I didn't listen to them. I listened to the dream inside me. And look where I am now. Do you think I can be a pilot too?" Zoe asked, and there was both hope and fear in her voice. Gabrielle took the girl's small hands in hers. "Zoe, I don't just think you can. I know you can. You can be anything you want. Pilot, astronaut, airline captain, whatever calls to you. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong somewhere. Your dreams are valid. Your potential is unlimited. And when someone tries to hold you back, you remember this moment. You remember that Captain Washington told you that the sky belongs to you." Zoe threw her arms around Gabrielle's neck, hugging her tight. "Thank you," she whispered. Her mother wiped tears from her eyes. "Thank you, Captain. You have no idea what your courage means to us." But Gabrielle did know. Because she'd been that little girl once. She'd needed someone to tell her she belonged. And now she got to be that person for the next generation. As Zoe and her mother returned to their seats, Gabrielle felt something settle inside her chest. A sense of purpose. A sense of rightness. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. The pushback tractor began moving the aircraft away from the gate. Gabrielle and Latoya ran through their taxi checklist, their voices calm and professional over the intercom. Ground control cleared them to runway 18 right. The big jet moved smoothly across the taxiway, the Texas sun glinting off its wings. At the runway threshold, tower cleared them for takeoff. Gabrielle advanced the throttles, feeling the familiar surge of power as the engine spooled up. The nose lifted. The wheels left the ground. And they were flying. Positive rate, Latoya called out. Gear up, Gabrielle responded. The landing gear retracted with a satisfying thunk. Dallas fell away below them, the city shrinking to toy size. They climbed through 10,000 feet, through 20,000, through 30,000. The sky opened up around them, vast and blue and infinite. Gabrielle's hands moved across the controls with practiced ease, making small adjustments, guiding the aircraft along its planned route. This was her element. This was where she was meant to be. At cruise altitude, with the autopilot engaged and the flight progressing smoothly, Gabrielle picked up the PA handset. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Gabrielle Washington from the flight deck. On behalf of First Officer Latoya Johnson and our entire crew, welcome aboard. We're cruising at 37,000 feet, and we expect to arrive in Atlanta on schedule. The weather is beautiful, and you should have a smooth flight. Thank you for choosing to fly with us today. She paused, then added something that wasn't standard in the script. And to all the young people listening, especially the girls and the kids of color who might be wondering if aviation is for you, I want you to know something. The sky belongs to everyone who dares to dream. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If I can do this, so can you. Keep dreaming. Keep reaching. The world needs your perspective up here. She hung up the handset, and Latoya was looking at her with shining eyes. That was beautiful, Captain. Patricia's voice came over the intercom from the cabin. Passengers are applauding back here. I think you just inspired a lot of future pilots. The flight continued without incident. 2 hours later, they began their descent into Atlanta. The approach was smooth, the landing butter soft. As they taxied to the gate, Gabrielle felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She'd done it. She'd reclaimed her place in the sky. The trauma of what Trevor had done would always be part of her story, but it wouldn't define her. She was more than the discrimination she'd faced. She was a skilled professional, a mentor, a leader, a pioneer. She was Captain Gabrielle Washington, and she'd earned her place here. The passengers deplaned, many stopping to thank Gabrielle and Latoya personally. Zoe, the 10-year-old girl who wanted to be a pilot, came back to the cockpit one more time. Captain Washington, I'm going to work really hard. And someday, I'm going to be sitting right where you are. Gabrielle hugged her again. I believe in you, Zoe. And when you get your captain's wings, you send me a picture, okay? The little girl nodded solemnly, then skipped off the plane, already chattering to her mother about flight school. After the aircraft was empty, Gabrielle and Latoya completed their post-flight checks. They sat in the quiet cockpit for a moment, neither speaking, just absorbing the significance of what had just happened. Finally, Latoya broke the silence. Captain, can I ask you something? Gabrielle nodded. How do you do it? How do you keep going, knowing you'll probably face more discrimination, more people questioning you, more Trevors? Gabrielle thought about the question. I do it because if I don't, they win. Every time I fly, every time I mentor a young pilot, every time I speak up about injustice, I'm claiming space that was designed to exclude me. I'm making it a little easier for the next woman, the next black pilot, the next person who doesn't fit the stereotype. That's how change happens. One flight at a time. One conversation at a time. One Zoe at a time who realizes she can dream bigger than the world told her she could. They gathered their bags and headed into the terminal. As they walked through the concourse, Gabrielle's phone buzzed with a text from Linda Chen, the FAA inspector who'd believed her. Saw the news that you completed your first flight back. Congratulations, Captain. The sky is where you belong. Another text came in, this one from her niece Aisha, a college student who'd always looked up to her. Aunt Gabrielle, I just changed my major to aerospace engineering. Your story inspired me. Love you. Gabrielle smiled, texting back quick thank yous. Then her phone rang. It was Harrison Clark, her chief pilot. Gabrielle, excellent job today. Smooth flight, no issues. But I'm calling about something else. We've had 17 applications in the past month from young black women who specifically mentioned you as their inspiration for wanting to become pilots. Wings of Equality is making a real difference. I wanted you to know that. Gabrielle felt warmth spreading through her chest. 17 young women. 17 future captains, maybe. 17 chances to change the face of aviation. That evening, Wings of Equality held a board meeting at Gabrielle's house. The organization had grown beyond her wildest dreams. They'd awarded 50 scholarships so far, established mentorship programs at 20 flight schools, and partnered with major airlines to create diversity pipelines. But they weren't stopping there. We need to think bigger, Gabrielle told the board. Scholarships are great, but we also need to address the culture that creates Trevors. We need to work with airlines on accountability, on promotion practices, on ensuring that diverse pilots actually advance to captain and leadership positions. Roland Hayes, the president of OBAP who'd stood beside her at that first press conference, nodded enthusiastically. I've been in conversations with several airline CEOs. They're finally listening. The publicity from your case opened doors that have been closed for decades. We need to walk through them while they're open. The meeting lasted 3 hours, ending with an ambitious plan to expand Wings of Equality nationally, to create chapters in every major city, to build a network of support that would catch and protect pilots facing discrimination. 2 weeks later, Gabrielle received an unexpected phone call. It was Jennifer Martinez, the FAA administrator. Captain Washington, I have a request. The Department of Transportation is putting together a commission on diversity in transportation, not just aviation but across all modes. We want someone with real experience, someone who's lived the challenges, to help guide our policy recommendations. Would you be willing to serve? Gabrielle didn't hesitate. Yes. Absolutely yes. This was how systems changed. From the inside and the outside simultaneously. Pressure from activists and advocates, combined with people in power willing to listen and act. 6 months after her return to flying, Gabrielle stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., addressing a room full of transportation officials, airline executives, and advocacy groups. She'd been invited to speak at the inaugural meeting of the commission. When Trevor Mitchell questioned my credentials, she began, he wasn't just attacking me personally. He was attacking every person of color who's ever been told they don't belong. But here's what he didn't understand. We're not going anywhere. We're pilots. We're controllers. We're mechanics and engineers and executives. We've always been here, and will always be here. She continued, her voice gaining strength. The question isn't whether we belong. We've proven that 1,000 times over. The question is whether this industry will finally acknowledge our contributions, value our perspectives, and create systems that support rather than undermine us. That's why this commission matters. That's why your work matters. Because the next generation of pilots should never have to face what I faced. They should be able to walk into a cockpit confident that they'll be judged on their skills, their knowledge, their character. Not on the color of their skin. The room erupted in applause. But more importantly, over the following months, the Commission produced concrete recommendations. Mandatory bias training that actually worked, developed by experts in diversity and psychology. New complaint investigation procedures that protected accusers from retaliation while ensuring fair treatment for the accused. Transparent promotion criteria that couldn't be manipulated by bias. Accountability measures for airlines that failed to address discrimination. It wasn't perfect. No policy ever is. But it was progress. A year after the incident, Gabrielle stood in front of a flight school in Houston, watching the first cohort of Wings of Equality scholars receive their private pilot licenses. 20 young people, representing every race and ethnicity, every background, every type of person who'd been told aviation wasn't for them. They'd done it. They'd learned to fly. And many of them would go on to become commercial pilots, following in Gabrielle's footsteps. One of the graduates was LaToya's younger brother, a 19-year-old who'd been inspired by his sister's career. As she handed him his certificate, he grinned at her. "Thank you, Captain Washington. You changed my life." Gabrielle shook her head. "No, you changed your own life. I just held the door open." But that wasn't entirely true, and she knew it. She'd done more than hold a door. She'd kicked it down when it wouldn't open. She'd refused to accept discrimination as inevitable. She'd fought back, not just for herself but for everyone who would come after her. That night, Gabrielle sat on her back porch, looking up at the stars. Aircraft lights blinked across the sky, dozens of planes carrying thousands of passengers to destinations all over the world. Some of those planes were being flown by black pilots now. By women pilots. By pilots who'd seen her story and decided they wouldn't be intimidated or discouraged or driven away. Her phone buzzed with a final text of the day. It was from Zoe's mother, with a photo attached. Zoe in a flight simulator, grinning ear to ear, her small hands on the yoke. The caption read, "She won't stop talking about becoming a pilot. You gave her permission to dream. Thank you." Gabrielle saved the photo, adding it to a growing collection of young people she'd inspired. Each face represented hope. Each dream represented progress. Each future pilot represented a victory over the hatred and prejudice that had tried to ground her. Trevor Mitchell was in prison, his career destroyed, his name synonymous with racism in aviation. But he'd inadvertently done something he never intended. He'd sparked a movement. He'd forced an industry to confront its demons. He'd made Gabrielle Washington a household name and, in doing so, inspired thousands of young people to reach for the sky. In the end, his attempt to tear her down had only lifted her higher. She was flying now, not just physically but metaphorically, above the hate, above the prejudice, into a future where maybe, just maybe, the next black girl who walked into a cockpit would be welcomed without question. So here's my final question for all of you who've stayed with this story until the end. If you believe that everyone deserves equal opportunity regardless of their race or gender, comment below and tell us your own experience. Have you faced discrimination? Have you witnessed it? What did you do? Hit that like button if you support pilots like Captain Washington who refuse to be silenced. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep telling stories about courage, justice, and the people who fight for change. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it, especially the young people in your life who are dreaming big dreams. Tell them the sky belongs to them too. Thank you for listening to Captain Washington's story. Thank you for caring about justice. And remember, when someone tries to ground you because of who you are, you have a choice. You can stay down, or you can rise even higher. Captain Gabrielle Washington chose to rise. What will you choose? Until next time, keep reaching for the sky. Captain Gabrielle Washington's experience reveals profound truths about discrimination in professional spaces. First, credibility should never be assumed based on appearance. Qualifications, experience, and documented achievements matter far more than skin color or gender. Second, those who most loudly question others' legitimacy often harbor their own inadequacies and insecurities. Trevor Mitchell's accusation stemmed from his fraudulent credentials and inability to accept a black woman's authority. Third, systemic change requires both individual courage and institutional commitment. Gabrielle's willingness to speak out, combined with Inspector Linda Chen's thorough investigation, exposed corruption that endangered countless lives. The story also teaches us that silence enables injustice. The previous complaints against Trevor were dismissed because no one wanted the discomfort of confronting discrimination. Fourth, representation matters immensely. Young Zoe's dream of becoming a pilot crystallized when she saw someone who looked like her commanding an aircraft. Finally, transformation of pain into purpose creates lasting impact. Gabrielle could have walked away bitter and broken. Instead, she established wings of equality, ensuring future pilots wouldn't face the barriers she encountered. Her story proves that one person's refusal to accept injustice can spark movements that reshape entire industries. True victory isn't just personal vindication but creating pathways for those who follow. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in your workplace or community? How did you respond? Comment below and share your story. If you believe Captain Washington's courage deserves recognition, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell because we're committed to sharing stories of people who stand up against injustice and create real change. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration today, especially young people who are pursuing dreams in fields where they don't see many faces like theirs. Tell them that Captain Washington's story proves that excellence, determination, and courage can overcome even the most entrenched prejudice. Which part of Captain Washington's journey resonated most with you? Was it her grace under pressure, her decision to turn pain into purpose through wings of equality, or the moment she returned to the cockpit and welcomed young Zoe? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for watching and for caring about justice and equality. May you have the courage to stand up when you witness discrimination, the wisdom to support those facing injustice, and the determination to create change in your own sphere of influence. Keep flying high, keep dreaming big, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Until next time, remember that the sky truly belongs to everyone who dares to reach for it.